أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another Friday Circle. Jazakallah khair for attending. Today we have Brother Sharif Abu Laith, who will be presenting today's talk, Islam versus Atheism, debunking atheist logic. I'm sure you're all aware that there's been a concerted attack on Islam, its beliefs and values, which has gained momentum in secular societies which promote the removal of God from life's affairs, especially in the political realm. We have seen a barrage of misinformation and lies propagated by so-called thinkers and secularists who have shown that they have a nefarious agenda which has been supported by secular governments. Real debate and discussion has been suppressed by those very countries bearing the false flag of freedom. So inshallah today, Brother Sharif will be asking, can atheism provide solutions to man's problems versus Islam? I'd like to remind the audience today to please feel free to ask any questions or comments in the chat section on Facebook. And I'd like to remind you to please keep the discussion civil and within the Islamic etiquettes, inshallah ta'ala. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Brother Sharif Abu Laith.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for inviting me, the Friday Circle, for inviting me to give this short presentation, which really is an introduction to this topic. In fact, inshallah, I'll be preparing this in more detail for a proper course. But at the moment, what I want to do is I want to discuss this to give an overview and understanding of some sort of, general insight about this particular topic. So what's the topic? What am I going to talk about? I'm not necessarily going to go into the depth of the evidences for the belief in a creator, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, I just want to compare and contrast atheism as as the implications of atheism, in particular, atheism under a materialistic paradigm, and compare that to aspects of Islam. So that's what we're going to do today. And how does it impact how we would view life within an atheist lens, and some of the problems, some of the in principle problems that this would lead towards. So as the chair mentioned, we have seen in the last 20 years or so a rise in the number of people who call themselves atheists or who don't adopt a particular theistic belief. So, for example, on the screen there, I show certain numbers, certain statistics that the rise or the number of atheists currently is between 200 to 600 million. The largest number of atheists that exist are in China, Russia, and Western states. And obviously, it's unsurprising that China and Russia, in particular, have a large number of atheists, because obviously China is currently a communist country. Communism explicitly rejects belief in a creator. Russia, obviously, for 70 years or so was a communist country under Soviet Union. And, there were periods of time where they even banned and made it illegal to practice religion. So what you find is that the rise in atheism was a state-level interaction, particularly within communist countries. And also I mentioned about Western states as well. The largest rise of atheism exists obviously in Western countries in terms of the rate of rise, and it's normally leaving Christianity for atheism. And I give an example here of the US. In 2003, there was 11% who considered themselves atheists. And then in 2018, 21% of people considered themselves atheists. And in the same period of time of 2003 to 2018, Christianity in the US declined by approximately 10%. So, you got about 10% or so increase or rise of atheism. And at the same time, you've got approximately 10% decline in Christianity as well. So what are the reasons for this rise of atheism? Because obviously we probably, we come across it on social media, we come across it on TV. You have Richard Dawkins talking about religion being the source of all evil. You've got people like Ricky Gervais, who's a comedian, who, you know, talks about atheism and the fact that belief in gods is like belief in unicorns. So you have a lot of this type of discourse that's taken place, and particularly in the last 15, 20 years or so. So what's the reasons? Well, there's two main reasons for this. Firstly, is that in secular societies, it relegates the importance of God and religion in societal affairs. So how we interact within society, it doesn't matter whether you believe in God. In fact, God is marginalized from people's lives. And this leads towards the secularization of people's views and ideas, and therefore the unimportance of a belief in a creator, you know, belief in God. So if people no longer see the importance of asking this question, you know, people are regulating their lives by secular, worldly, no recourse to a religion or a spiritual belief system. So as a result, people tend to adopt what is the predominant value set within society. Secondly, is the war of terror narrative. And obviously, it was called the war on terror, but we know it was, the reality was it was the war of terror. So after 2001, after the WTC World Trade attacks, we saw the invasions of Afghanistan, then later Iraq. We saw bombings in Somalia and Yemen and Sudan by Western states. And we saw, you know, correlated with these attacks, these invasions of Muslim lands, also attacks against religion and Islam in particular. So Islam in particular narrative was that if we don't invade these countries, these Muslim countries, then these people who are motivated by Islam will attack us in the West. And so people started to attack religion generally, but with particular focus of Islam. And therefore, they believed that the way to stop quote unquote terrorism or extremism was to attack certain fundamental beliefs, like the belief in a God, belief in a creator. Richard Dawkins, this is a quote that he wrote in his book, The God Delusion. And he said, "They might not be horrible people. They may be righteous people who believe they're doing right. I think the 9/11 hijackers all sincerely believed that they were doing right and proper moral religious thing. They were not in themselves evil. They were following their faith. And faith is pernicious because it can do that to people. It can do that to otherwise decent people." So he's arguing the fact that these 9/11 hijackers and attackers, they may have been good people, but because they believed in a religion, it made them do bad things. Yeah, completely decontextualizing it from the political situation, but that's what he was trying to push. Similarly, Sam Harris, again, focusing mainly upon Islam, but religion generally, but Islam in particular, he says, Islam has problems and points of conflict with modernity and secular culture and civil society, and a value like free speech that Mormonism doesn't have, or the Anglican communion doesn't have, or Scientology. So he's saying Islam is a uniquely problematic belief set. And so many of these popular atheists, they will target Islam specifically and the concept of God generally, because they believe if you get rid of religion, you'll end this violence that's taking place. Again, completely decontextualizing it from the greater violence that's been perpetrated by Western states upon Muslim lands, like in Iraq or previously Afghanistan, or the previous colonial period and the post-colonial period as a result of that. So we've seen in the media and by politicians attacks on the Sharia, Hudud, attacks on hijab, gender relations in Islam, halal meat, jihad, caliphate, Quran. We've also seen very recently in Batley School the whole debate about whether it should be a right to insult the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we've seen attacks against the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like I said, you have popular books like God Delusion, or TV programs like The Root of All Evil, meaning that religion is the root of all evil, or even the other TV show called The Story of God as well, which tries to give an anthropological explanation as to why people believe in God. So what is atheism? So let's talk about that. Atheism, in essence, there's two general definitions. There is a classical definition about what atheism is. So the classical definition of atheism is a positive claim or a knowledge claim that there are no God or gods. That's the classical understanding of what atheism is. The modern day, the more popular, in today's day and age, of what atheism is atheism is just simply the evidence is insufficient for a god or gods. So it's the belief that gods don't exist because there's insufficient evidence for a god or god's claim. Yeah. Now, both these two definitions, the classical one or the more modern one, they both are positive claims, because even if you turn around and say there is no God, that's a positive claim. There's a claim to knowledge. But if you're saying that the evidence is insufficient for a God or gods, that's also a positive claim, because that is indicating the fact that the evidence that you've assessed does not justify a belief in a deity, yeah, in a creator, in a God, yeah. Therefore, in essence, whichever definition you want to use, therefore, no agent chose to create the universe. The universe, including humans, arose by either from nothing or an eternal natural process. Yeah. So, in essence, what they're saying is that the universe, including human beings, either we came from nothing or there was some sort of eternal but naturalistic or materialistic process that took place. Yeah. So the question is then, is atheism under those definitions classified as a worldview or an ideology? And the answer is no. Atheism, like I said, is either the affirmation that there are no gods or the claim that we don't believe in gods because there's insufficient evidence for a God claim. Yeah. So it doesn't really tell you anything about morality. It doesn't tell you anything about how to live your life or any of these types of things. But atheism, and in particular here that I'm talking about atheism under materialism, does have some key implications. Yeah. And one of those, and we're going to talk about these key implications today. Some of those are related to the special nature of human beings, yeah, where human beings see themselves within the wider universe, yeah. So it has some implications regards this, and this is what we're going to focus and talk about today. So what is a human being? Well, as we said, there is an intuitive, natural, belief that human beings are special, that we're unique, yeah, that there's something unique about human beings. So what is it that makes us unique and special? Is it the fact that we're made of matter? Well, it's more than just the fact that we're made of matter, because rocks are made of matter. So rocks are no different to human beings in that respect, because a rock is made of matter, human being is made of matter. So, it doesn't distinguish between a rock and a human being. Two, is it the fact that we're living? Well, again, you could look at an amoeba, a bacteria, and a bacteria is also a living organism, and we as human beings are living organisms as well. So, yes, we may be getting more specific. We're not talking about rocks now. We're talking about something that's a property that's shared by human beings or living things that are not shared by rocks, I being alive. But it still doesn't distinguish. The third thing, and really it's the 3 and the 4 points, third point and the 4th point here, which starts to distinguish human beings. The third one is that we have instincts, but here the primary instinct that I'm talking about is the desire to worship. So yes, we have other instincts, the desire to eat, drink, these biological needs, the desire to survive, to protect ourselves, if we're under danger, flight and fright response, flight and fight response, yeah. But similarly, you'll see that in the animal kingdom as well. They have that similar, flight and fight response as well. So they have that. They would also, we also see within the animal kingdom the need to procreate and reproduce the species. Again, same thing with human beings. But one thing that we don't see with animals that we do see with human beings is this desire to sanctify, this desire to revere something that's more than material. So you don't see apes or gorillas, in Congo, producing an altar to worship and sacrifice things for this, what they believe is a deity or deity. Yeah, so they don't undertake this reverence or sanctification process, but you do see that with human beings. So it's one of the aspects that makes human beings unique and special. The 4th aspect, which is the mind, which is again unique to human beings. And what I mean by unique to human beings here, I'm going to break down the mind, into a number of aspects to this, and I'll try my best to get through all of these points as best as possible within the short period of time, inshallah. But these are all really detailed, deep discussions to have. So in terms of the mind, we have consciousness, again, unique to us as human beings, or something special with human beings. Maybe other animals have it, but it's something that's special. It requires some explanation as to how we got it. Free will, the ability to choose actions that we want to perform, something that we intuitively feel we have, which is free will. The ability to be, have rational capacity, the ability to choose between what we believe is rational or logical and rejecting something that we see as irrational or illogical. That's something that we believe human beings have a unique capacity for. Moral agents, the fact that we argue and justify our actions based upon a moral criteria. Yeah, so whether a person's believes in a god, believes in Christianity or Hinduism, or believes in different ideologies like capitalism or communism, or believes in Islam, we seek to justify our belief systems and the actions from those belief systems within quote unquote moral argumentation, because we want to be seen as being good, doing good things. So we're moral agents. And with that is this idea that we are human beings who seek out purpose. We don't just see purpose around us, but we actually see that there should be an intrinsic purpose to our own life. And the final aspect of that is language capacity, the fact that human beings have this capacity to construct abstract symbols and sounds and to communicate those abstract symbols and sounds to other conscious, rational, capable, moral agents, i.e. other human beings as well. So that's what a human being is. So atheism simply states humans are matter. This is what the implication of atheism under a materialistic paradigm. That atheism simply states human beings are matter, are a product of naturalistic causes that occurred by random chance and or for no reason except governed by physical laws. This is what the implication of atheism under materialism or naturalism results in. You're not special or having any inherent self-worth beyond being material. Yeah. Atheism, therefore, cannot account for any of the things. This is what I'm going to explain. That all those things that I mentioned, atheism, that makes a human being, atheism itself cannot account for what distinguishes human beings, makes them special, something we intuitively feel. Yeah. So we intuitively feel that actually we should care for human beings, that human life has greater value than an amoeba's life, yeah, or a bacteria's life, or even a tree, that we intuitively accept that there is a difference between one form of matter to another form of matter. But that difference, that distinguishing factor, cannot be explained or accounted for under an atheistic materialistic paradigm. Yeah. So the first thing that we said, that human beings are made from matter, and I don't want to go into too much detail regards to this because it goes into a lot of detail about the evidences of proving that a creator, a necessary being, is another way of saying creator, or wajib al-wujud in Arabic, exists, is to account for matter. Why does matter exist? And matter that exists in the universe is what we call a contingent possible being, yeah? Which basically means that it is something that exists that didn't have to exist or could have existed in another way, and therefore requires an explanation, or it's dependent upon something external to itself to explain why it exists. So everything of matter that exists within the universe, and even if there's outside the universe, if they're material or contingent, they're not necessary to exist. They need an explanation. They're dependent upon something. Yeah. Now, atheism under materialism inevitably has no explanation for matter, where it came about. What they, in essence, tried to do, or a number of atheists try to appeal to, is either brute facts about the universe, an infinite regression, or matter coming from nothing, as I mentioned here, by magic. So what do I mean by brute facts? So what they'll say is they will appeal to the fact that the universe exists with the properties that exist. They will acknowledge that the properties of the universe did not have to exist in the way that they did. They even acknowledge the universe didn't even have to exist. There's no logical necessity for the universe to exist, but it does by brute fact, meaning it's a contingent being that requires an explanation, but we will not give it an explanation. That's what brute fact means, yeah? So they don't have an explanation in essence. They're just saying, well, it just does. An infinite regress is basically saying that one limited dependent thing is dependent upon another limited dependent thing in an infinite chain. And, you know, maybe in the Q&As we can talk about this more further, but this is a logical problem. It's a logical absurdity, especially when we try to bring that to bring it into reality, yeah? Or the final example or final sort of explanation that they give is that matter came from nothing. So, you know, the universe popped into existence from nothing by some sort of magic, because beyond the universe, there's magical things that anything can happen because all the laws break down, the laws of science, the laws of natural laws, the laws of logic, everything breaks down. So therefore something can come from nothing. So this is, you know, one of the other explanations that they try and give, yeah? I know I'm being a bit flippant about their views, but if you do speak to atheists, it ultimately comes down to appealing to something which is so mysterious that it is might as well just be appealing to some sort of magical thing. Now, Islam, what does Islam say? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentions numerous times about the signs for creation. Yeah, the signs that these limited dependent things need a creator. In Surah Tur, verse 35 and 36, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Am khuluqu min ghayri shay'in, am humul khaliqun. Or were they created by nothing? Or were they themselves the creators? Yeah, and the next verse says, or did they think they created the heavens and the earth? Bala yuqinun. Nay, they have no firm belief. They have no firm foundation to explain why limited, finite things exist. They don't have an explanation for this if they reject a necessary, independent, unlimited creator that created them. Yeah. So this is obviously what Islam pushes. In the famous surah of Quran, in Surah Ikhlas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu Samad, that Allah is complete and perfect. He's independent. And the word as-samad also means that which depends upon it, but it does not depend upon anything. Yeah, it's eternal, but everything depends upon it. So this is what we understand from an Islamic basis, and it provides an explanation, and it is intellectually and rationally coherent too. So living. Atheist holds that life arose from non-living matter. This is basically what we call abiogenesis. Now, abiogenesis is not something we've ever observed. So we've never observed something coming from nothing. But if you ask an atheist whether abiogenesis ever occurred, they will have to affirm it in one way or another, even if they believe in ancient alien theory. You know, I don't know if the audience here has ever heard of ancient alien theory, but this is this idea that aliens came hundreds of thousands of years, or maybe billions of years ago, and seeded life on planet Earth. Yeah, but atheists, even if they believe that, they have to still account how did these aliens come about, and so ultimately they regress back to a point where there was non-life, and from a non-living situation, life arose. Now, all empirical observations don't point to abiogenesis. There's no evidence for it. There is no observation for it. I'm not saying it's impossible that non-living matter can turn into life. I'm just saying from their perspective, from an empirical perspective, all the evidence points to biogenesis, which basically means life from other living things. Yeah. Therefore, atheism adheres to a belief it sees as certain. So they're certain about this. You can't be an atheist if you're not certain, if you don't have a certain position on abiogenesis, life coming from non-living things. But they're certain about it. They hold on to this belief without any evidence, and in fact contradicting the empirical evidence we have. So yeah, I'm not saying that in the future we might have the technology to do this, but I'm saying at the moment we don't have the technology, we don't have the observation, we don't have the empirical facts, and yet atheists under materialism will still hold to the idea that life came from non-living things. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in Surah Al-Jathiyah, verse 26, say to them, Allah gives life, then causes you to die, and then will assemble you on the day of resurrection, about which there is no doubt. But most of mankind know not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirming that life arose because ultimately it had a causal agent, a necessary, unlimited, independent creator who himself is alive, conscious, aware, and intentionally created human beings. So the instincts of sanctification. Sanctification is this idea that people seek worship. They want to worship something more than material. So all cultures, and why do we say that human beings have this sanctification instinct? Well, that's because when we sense different cultures and different civilizations across the world, and not even just across the world today, but across time, different times, then we see all cultures, all civilizations sanctified and worshipped something. So this is not just something that's learnt behavior, from previous religious community. This seems to be something as a necessary fact of the human condition. This is a fact of the human condition that human beings seek to revere and worship. And even in communist societies which denied religion or any form of religiosity, we saw this type of sanctification come out in other ways, like reverence of their leadership. For example, in North Korea, where religious practices are practically forbidden, they preserved the body of the former North Korean leader, Kim Il-sung. They embalmed his body and lies inside a clear glass sarcophagus. And I've underlined that there, because this idea of a sarcophagus is something which is not it's a very religious thing to do, preserve this person's body. Why would you preserve this human's body when he's just material, like a rock now, or like a tree? No real difference between it. And also his former residence has been turned into a mausoleum, and he's referred to as the eternal leader. So it's very, very religious language that's being used within a communist society that seeks to deny religiosity. And there's various studies that have demonstrated that actually religiosity and sanctification is something which is part of the human condition. There's a few here. So I quoted the co-director of the project, which was a project done at University of Oxford in 2011, Professor Roger Trigg. And he said that religion was not just something for a peculiar few to do on Sundays instead of playing golf. We have gathered a body of evidence that suggests that religion is a common fact of human nature across different societies. This suggests that attempts to suppress religion are likely to be short-lived, as human thought seems to be rooted in religious concepts such as existence of supernatural agents or gods and the possibility of an afterlife or pre-life. Similarly, Graham Lawton, who himself is an atheist and is a writer for the New Scientist, said they point to studies showing, for example, that even people who claim to be committed atheists tacitly hold religious beliefs such as the existence of an immortal soul. And Justin Barrett, who was also an academic and also did various studies on this, he said the preponderance of scientific evidence for the past 10 years or so has shown that a lot more seems to be built into the natural development of children's minds than we once thought, including the predisposition to see the natural world as designed and purposeful, and that some kind of intelligent being is behind that purpose. So what does Islam say? Islam says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created human beings, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That and I, Allah, created not the jinns or the humans except that they should worship me alone. Meaning that in Islam, not only do we recognize this sanctification instinct as a fact of human nature, but rather we believe it was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have a way to guide and see its sanctification, guide its satisfaction of sanctification through prayer, through worship, through living our life in accordance to the commands and prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now we're going to the really quickly, trying to go through this quickly as possible, the mind consciousness, the mind problem. So again, atheism under naturalism, they don't have an explanation for consciousness. And in fact, it is coined by Professor Chalmers, who's a professor in the philosophy of the mind. He mentioned this problem, he coined the term the hard problem of consciousness, Because what he was saying is that under a naturalistic, materialistic paradigm, what does that mean? Basically, it means that if you just say that consciousness arose because of your brain and how there was firing of chemicals within the brain, action potentials, release of neurotransmitters, across different neurons. If you believe that's how consciousness arose, then there is an in principle problem that you can never bridge the gap to. Now, this is quite a complicated and broad subject area, so please forgive me if I don't go through it in too much detail. But in essence, science can never provide an explanation how consciousness arises. Why? And this is a very basic point here. Consciousness is a first-person subjective experience. Yeah. So, for example, if you see the color red, you see a property called red, the redness of that of it, maybe a can or a cup. You see the redness of that can. Yeah. So that's a property of the can. Now, if you're trying to look from, that's a first-person subjective experience. But if you're trying to look from science, now science is what? Is a third-person objective analysis. So if I'm trying to understand the properties of the color red, I'm going to look at the reflection of light at a specific wavelength and a specific energy. Note that I said specific wavelength and specific energy of the reflection of light. Nowhere in that was the property red, because the property red is not something that you can understand by looking at the properties of light. You can't even understand it by looking at the properties of light and how it interacts with the neurons. Yeah, none of this can be answered from this third person objective analysis, through the scientific method. You can't work out what red is. Yeah, it's like somebody who's been blind from birth, and if you try to explain to him first person subjective experience like this can or this chair or this jumper is the color red, he will not be able to comprehend what the color red is because he's never seen it. But if I've never seen the atom, I can have a third person objective analysis or explanation of what an atom is. Even though I've never seen it, I can understand it. In the same way, if I wanted to explain to somebody what a neuron is, I could explain to them what a neuron is, because that property is able to be analyzed through a scientific process. But properties like red or taste or experience cannot be done this. So this is a problem that materialism cannot answer, which is why are human beings conscious? And in fact, some atheists like Professor Dennett, deny consciousness is a real thing. They say consciousness is an illusion. Yeah, it's an illusion. It doesn't really exist. Yeah? This is how far they have to go down. Remember, what makes human beings special? What makes human beings unique? What makes up a human being? Matter, life, the sanctification instinct, the mind, consciousness. These things in an atheistic, materialistic paradigm cannot be explained. So there's a quote here. I won't go into that quote. So the other aspect of the mind, which again, from a first-person subjective experience, we all intuitively feel, is that we have this ability to make choice. But materialism cannot account for free will. If the mind is simply the product of materialistic forces, these material forces are not conscious. They don't operate according to free will. Yeah. Then it means that your thoughts and choices were not determined by you, but by non-conscious particles interacting under non-conscious physical laws. So if materialism is true, we're all just a product. Our mind is just a product of a brain. Then every future state is a product of past states. This includes your free will, which, just to explain that a bit more further in detail, what it means is this, is that your choice is predicated upon your brain chemistry. Your brain chemistry is predicated upon how the atoms are interacting internally in your brain and how it interacts externally with other atoms or other quantum level events, or whatever you want to say, macro level events or quantum level events, how they're interacting with these things. These things are themselves not conscious, and therefore your ability to say I've chosen this was not a choice you made, but it was just simply physical laws. It's like if you knock over a domino, you get a row of dominoes that will fall over. None of the dominoes chose. And so in essence, this is what they're saying about free will. Free will is an illusion. It does not exist. And in fact, this is exactly what Sam Harris said, who's a neuroscientist and popular atheist. He said free will is an illusion. Our wills are simply not of our own making. Thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which we are unaware of and over which we exert no conscious control. We do not have the freedom we think we have. Yeah. So again, one of the things that we think is very important as human beings is the ability to make free choices. Yeah. And yet, under an atheistic, materialistic paradigm, free choices don't even exist. You're not free. You're just literally a robot that thinks it's free, but it's not free at all, making programmed choices, and the program that's making those choices is not even conscious. Whereas under an Islamic paradigm within Islam and the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ demonstrates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given human beings free will. In Surah Al-Balad, verse 10, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, and did we not show him the two high roads of good and evil? Meaning we have shown these two roads, two paths to either to follow good or follow evil, and it's a human being who makes the choice. Similarly, as narrated by Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the pen is lifted from three people: a sleeping person until he awakens, a child until he becomes an adult, and an insane person until he regains his sanity. What does it mean? It means that the responsibility, the taklif that's placed upon a person is based upon the idea he has a rational mind that's able to make free choices. This is the paradigm that Islam built. It acknowledges and accepts that free will exists, and this in fact was a creation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he gave us the ability to make choices. The other aspect with regards to the mind, and I'll try and be really, really quick, so please bear with me, is the rational capacity. Materialism results in determinism, means we don't have the ability to make free choices. If we believe that free will does not exist, as Sam Harris said, it's an illusion. There's things happening in the background which we're not conscious of, and we don't have control over, that are determining our thoughts. This means humans did not choose their thoughts they hold. They cannot change their thoughts based upon analysis of evidence, as this presupposes humans have free will to make choices. Meaning, you have to have free will to say, I freely choose this argument based upon the evidences, as opposed to this argument, which I don't believe the evidences are true. But if you deny free will, you have to deny rational capacity, because it means you have to deny that people can make choices based upon evidence, rather than making choices based upon brain chemistry interacting in the background. So the ideas you believe are true are not grounded on any rational decisions you made, but were thoughts that were determined for you. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions in the Quran, verily in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternations of the night and the day, لِآيَاتِ لِلْعُلِ الْأَلْبَابِ, that indeed these are signs for men of understanding, people who have a mind. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying you can make rational choices, and that actually if you sense the reality, you can come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your purpose of life, all of these things about the world around us as well. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying you can make rational choices, because rational choices and the capacity to have this mind was something, again, founded or grounded upon the existence of a creator who gave us this capacity to make these types of rational decisions. Moral agency and purpose, and I'm just going to finish on this last slide, really, although there's other points that I could mention. So I'll just go back a bit. So moral agency and purpose. Atheism is a belief that we came from nothing, by nothing, for no reason. That's what some atheists believe. That we also established that atheism under materialism has the inability to establish free will. So you can't establish that you know, if you got somebody who goes around killing people, you say, oh, that person's made a bad choice, an immoral choice. But how can you say he made an immoral choice if he doesn't have the ability to choose? That he is simply determined to do the action. Yeah. So the inability to establish free will would render morality null and void. You know, if a rock is rolling down a hill, you don't say, well, it's making a choice or it's undertaking a moral action. It's just following laws. In the same way, if somebody kills and mass rapes and murders people, yeah, and tortures people, they're not doing it because they're making a bad choice, but and being immoral, because rather they're doing it because their brain chemistry determined them to do that. So morality becomes null and void. Humans are accidents whose purpose has no inherent meaning, no objective meaning, no inherent, no objective meaning in life. Yeah, we just literally people who are products of accidents of nature that came about randomly, that we think we're conscious, but maybe we're not. We think we've got free will, but we don't under a materialistic paradigm. We think that we can make choices which are good or bad. We can't, because those choices are predetermined. We think we're rational agents, but the reality is we are not rational agents, because under materialism, those choices that we think are rational are actually predetermined for us. So this results in something called nihilism, which is basically the end of meaning, yeah, the death of meaning itself. Now, inshallah, there's more to be said in regards to this. Obviously, I quoted some ayat of Quran. I'm not going to go into the ayat in too much detail, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically mentioning these verses of Quran about how human beings have been created with truth, with the ability to have moral guidance and seek that moral guidance by seeking what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do. But inshallah, I'll leave it there and maybe open it up to any questions or comments. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Sharif. Inshallah, I'll open up the floor to any questions or comments you may have. If you'd like to share your comments or questions on the chat section of Facebook, Jazakallah khair. Inshallah.
I don't know if you can see me now. Can you see me now?
Yeah, I can see you clearly, alhamdulillah.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, we have a question from Brother Tariq. He says, even what Sam Harris said, he can't be sure about it, as he did not say it out of free will and conviction. Rather, it's just his brain chemistry that made him say that.
Well, this is the 100%. This is the problem, is that if you start to deny certain intuitive, basic facts, then you will lead yourself into these absurdities. Yeah, he's trying to. Yeah, and this is one of the biggest absurdities about denying free will under materialism, is that if you say that, well, we studied the brain and came to the conclusion that the brain is, you know, and the mind is just brain chemistry operating. Therefore, if it's brain chemistry operating, then we don't have choices. Then as a result, if we didn't have choices, then how did you say that you analyzed the brain? Because that implies, the implicit assumption here is that you had a choice to weigh up the evidence. But if you didn't have the choice to weigh up the evidence, you're coming to a conclusion that can never be grounded under a rational basis.
Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, we have some points from a discussion during the week by a gentleman called Walt Morley. He says the onus of proof is on those that claim someone existed, as it is stupid to believe in something without proof. You cannot prove that he did not exist the same way you cannot prove that unicorns exist.
So I don't know if the question is simply saying that nowhere in the discussion that I said is believe in God because atheists can't disprove God. I didn't say that. And I don't think many theists would argue, and certainly Muslims don't argue, the reason why we believe in God is because atheism can't disprove God. Yeah. Rather, in the presentation that I gave today was just simply about how there are some serious implications under an atheistic materialistic paradigm. The fundamental aspect of this is that what makes human beings special cannot be grounded under this paradigm. Yeah, you cannot differentiate between a rock and a human being. Yeah, this is what's going to happen. That you cannot ground your rationality, you cannot ground your free will, you cannot ground your consciousness. You adhere to ideas such as abiogenesis, which are not grounded on any empirical facts and observation of abiogenesis. Yeah, all of these things are fundamentally problematic under an atheistic materialistic paradigm. So, you know, the issue then becomes is that why would anybody adopt such a position which not only does not explain reality, yeah, but also results in logical absurdities about reality, meaning we feel we have we feel we are free willing agents that can make rational decisions, but then we adopt a position that says no, we're not free willing agents that can make rational decisions. Yeah, and then the absurdity also is compounded by some atheists then claiming that they're being free thinkers and rational. No, actually, you put yourself into a worse situation, a worse box. So I think really it should make us think about, this idea of atheism, to say that, look, and here's my discussion or point about two atheists themselves, is to really think about the serious implications of not being able to ground any of these things.
Continuing on this discussion, there was a reply from Roberto in a discussion between Steve and Roberto. Roberto said, I'll save you the time. There's no such thing as atheistic logic. Atheism, unlike religion, is not a set of ideas or doctrines. It's just the non-acceptance of the claim of the existence of any God. For the solutions for man's problems, one should look into science or philosophy. In that regard, both perform far better than any religion. And Steve's response to that was, atheistic logic is the same as religious logic. Both requite an unsubstantiated belief based upon nothing more than the old enemy faith. Agnosticism, the only logical opinion. Science and philosophy are indeed much better for potential solutions. I mean, this discussion on science and philosophy seems to be a common thread here.
Well, yeah, obviously, look, I think one thing that I'll probably say is that maybe to build a little bridges, I probably don't like the idea of atheist logic, as a term. Maybe obviously for the title, to capture an audience, the organizers use that. But yeah, obviously atheists don't necessarily have a logic. And I went through the different explanations of what atheism is. The classical definition of atheism, which was to deny that God exists, or the modern day definition, which is say that there's insufficient evidence to substantiate a God claim or God's claim. Yeah. So I acknowledge that's, and I think the person who wrote the question would also acknowledge that particular definition of atheism under both things. Yeah. Now the next question, the next point that was raised was that, okay, science now can answer it. But the problem is that, well, there's a few problems. Science deals with a particular remit. Yeah. It deals with things which are observable and testable. Yeah. But science is built upon certain rational and logical axioms. Yeah. So, for example, one of those axioms is that human beings have free will. Yeah. That we are able to follow the evidence and make a decision based upon the data and the evidence. If we deny the fact that we have free will, then we deny the ability to follow the evidence, to say that we can choose to follow the evidence. You can't choose to follow the evidence. You don't even choose to follow anything. Rather, you're compelled to follow whatever ideas, whether it accords to the reality and the evidence is or not. Yeah, and you cannot distinguish between the two now. So it assumes free will. Yeah, it assumes consciousness. It assumes the ability to make that you are consciously aware. It assumes the idea that you can ground your rationality. It assumes causality, cause and effect. Yeah, it assumes that future events will follow past experiences. What we sense in the past will be used to predict what we expect in the future. So if we drop an apple and we see it fall to the ground, we'll now assume that every time I drop an apple on planet Earth, it will drop to the ground. Yeah. So these are assumptions that are inbuilt within the empirical or the scientific method. Yeah. So yes, science is great at observation of things that we can sense, but they're built upon these axioms which science has to assume to be true, and therefore cannot be substantiated in a definitive way. Now, those things which are outside of what can be sensed directly, for example, if I had a painting of a Mona Lisa, everybody would say, the Mona Lisa was painted by a painter, Leonardo da Vinci. Now, is that a conclusion that we come through science, through testing and experience? Or is it something that we come through testimonial evidence, as an example, something that's you know, we're using a different methodology to arrive at an idea, a knowledge claim. Yeah. So obviously we're using a different methodology. Similarly, if I turn around and say conscious, you know, such and such person is a conscious being, yeah, or I'm a conscious being, and somebody says, yeah, but I can test it because I can open up your brain and look inside your brain. Yeah. In the same way, you know, if you turn around and atheist, you ask an atheist, do you believe your mother's conscious? Yeah. And the person said, yeah, and we can prove it. You know, sometimes they say we can prove it as well. We can look at it through, you know, ECGs, you know, or you know, what I don't know what to call it, electrocardiograms of the brain, see the you know, electrical signals, all that type of thing. Therefore, we can prove somebody's conscious like that. And he's like, well, hold on, is that the process you did in order to come to the conclusion your mother's conscious? Did you have to physically see the brain activity before you made that decision? Yeah. And up until that position of seeing her brain activity, you're just agnostic about it. No, obviously. So there are different methodologies just from direct sensation alone. And obviously, as Muslims, we believe in a rational methodology, and the rational methodology is to try to establish from observations and what we sense of the reality certain conclusions, even if those conclusions are not directly in themselves observable, but they're the implication, they're the entailments of the observations of those events. Yeah, they're the implications of the observed event, and we can make certain rational conclusions regards to this. Then I would say that, on the one hand, everything under an atheistic materialistic paradigm has logical problems in grounding certain fundamental things. Under a theistic paradigm, particularly within the Islamic paradigm, what you find is that we can come to a rational conclusion that a necessary being that has a will, an independent, eternal creator exists that has a will, that chose to create, exists. We can come to that rational conclusion, and then it solves all these other problems. It solves the problem of consciousness, rationality, free will, morality, purpose of life, language. All of these things that we believe that makes human beings special can now be solved under this paradigm. There is an explanation, whereas this other paradigm under materialism doesn't just not solve it, not explain it. In fact, it denies what we intuitively know.
Jazakallah khair, Sharif. I have a nice message here from somebody that you know, Justin Downing. He says,
Oh, Justin.
yeah, Justin says,
Wow.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Sharif,
Wow.
for helping me out of atheism and into Islam a few days ago. You're a great friend.
Wa alaikum salam. Brother Khalil, as he's known now, Khalil Allah, mashallah. Justin actually, he runs, I think he's still part of it, but he ran a atheist YouTube channel called Empathetic Atheist. And for the last couple of months or so, we've been talking about these types of topics, myself, other Muslims as well, with himself and other atheists and even other believers of other religions like Christianity and you know, Buddhism and all the different religions. And you know, alhamdulillah, you know, with the brother, you know, he was very open-minded. He was willing to you know, question his own presuppositions, but obviously he will also probably admit that at the beginning he was under the impression that all religious claims, all belief claims in a creator are like, you know, his previous experience or other religions like Christianity, which is seen as maybe irrational or not having a firm rational foundation. So I think when a lot of sincere people out there who maybe reject Christianity or reject certain religions and therefore reject God, when they come across Islam, they do sense that Islam is very different compared to maybe what their experiences of religion are. And certainly something that I would maybe encourage other non-Muslims, atheists out there to really think about this, that you might have rejected a particular religious claim, but it doesn't necessitate that you should reject theism as a whole. And certainly look within Islam and look at the evidences and arguments that Islam provides. Because as Muslims, we believe that you have to have an evidential approach towards your belief. Yeah, so we believe that, you know, you substantiate that there is a creator through rational evidence. In Arabic, we say dalil aqli, and that you have to substantiate that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the Prophet. Yeah, and again, we use rational evidence for this. And what is then entailed within the religious text has to be established from that religious text, the scripture, the Quran, and also the practices and the statements of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through the Sunnah. So these are the so everything has to be established from this basis. You can't just say, well, I had a dream, I had a feeling, and that's sufficient to justify. You have to be able to back it up with evidence. And even when we talk about rational evidence, dalil aqli, or evidence of the mind, scholars of the past in Islam, like Imam Ghazali from 1,000 years ago, he defined the different types of rational evidences. The empirical evidence he put under testimonial evidence. So he demonstrated examples of how people believe in things without direct observation. Like, for example, we believe that the earth is round, but most people have never seen the earth being round. Most people don't know the mathematics of how to prove that the earth is round, a sphere. Yeah. But we believe it through testimonial evidence, through evidence that, well, we believe or we have trust that all the satellites are orbiting and taking the correct pictures, etc. So it's testimonial evidence. And the third type of evidence that Imam Ghazali mentioned is rational or logical evidence, like analytic propositions and things like this. Yeah. So so we have a tradition for this. This is an Islamic tradition.
Jazakallah khair, Sharif.
Okay.
We have a question from Brother Ferry Jonathan. Salam, if there is no free will, that means there is no justice system or punishment. Wouldn't we all just be fatalistic?
Well, yeah, walaikum salam, rahmatullah. Yeah, obviously, as Muslims, we don't believe that that there is no free will. We believe that there is limited area by which we can make choices. Yeah, there's a sphere that we live in that we can make choices, and based upon those choices, we're held accountable for. Yeah. So as a result, for us, justice is following according to that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought. And if we follow it to the best of our ability, then that's considered justice, and we seek the reward and the pleasure from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in salvation. And obviously, if we freely choose to reject that, if we freely choose to go against that, then we're liable to punishment, and we're considered being oppressors, whether that's even to our own selves or to other people around us. Yeah. So yeah, we believe in this idea, but the problem is that how does a materialist, how does somebody like Sam Harris, this is what I don't understand, is that Sam Harris can moralize about Islam and say Islam is the worst evil religion out there. It's the motherlode of bad ideas, in his own words. Yeah. How can he moralize about anything when he doesn't believe human beings have the ability to make moral judgments? To make moral judgments, you have to have free will. Yeah. If it's deterministic, based upon non-conscious factors that determine your choices, yeah, then there's no way to then account for free will. Yeah, there's no way to account for these things. So as a result, you're not making moral judgments. You can't say that you're being just. You can't even turn around and say that this particular ideology or way of life or religion is considered more moral, yeah, or more just, or great, or is worse evil than this, because you can't ground any moral decision making. Yeah, you can't balance the two, because to evaluate the two means evaluating evidences. To evaluate evidences presupposes the ability to make a choice. I think it's there is a fundamental problem with this idea of free will. Yeah, because it just goes against the very heart of what it means to be a human being. Yeah. So this is something that people need to really be aware of. I think atheists in particular, to think about this.
A question from Jason Smith. What is the difference between an agnostic and an atheist? Is it more rational for someone to be an agnostic or an atheist?
So I think, like I said, classically, the definition of atheism is a belief that there are no gods. It's a very assertive, what they call hard atheist position. But later on, I think because it was considered irrational to be an atheist, because the reason why it's irrational to be an atheist is how can somebody have a knowledge claim that there are no gods? or no God. How does a person affirm that? Yeah, at best they can say, we can't see one, but it doesn't then conclude that therefore there is no God, just simply because you've not observed or experienced a creator. So later on, what they did was that they, I think in the 1970s, I think it might have been Jonathan Flew, who actually later on became a theist, but he was quite a prominent atheist at the time. He rechanged the definition of atheism, and as opposed to making this hard claim that there are no gods, he made a more of a weaker claim to say there's not sufficient evidence for gods or God, for a creator. So this is what they started saying. They would say, well, there's not sufficient evidence, or they'll say, well, we're all atheists, until we're proven something. So I think they made this. This position actually would have been classically seen as a position of agnosticism, but then they relabeled it to say no, this is now atheism itself. So I think they did that in order to try to divert the burden of proof away from themselves and say the burden of proof is upon the believer to claim that there is a creator, and therefore he must prove it. And if he doesn't prove it, then I am an atheist as a result of this. But yeah, look, there's lots to be said about this topic because, I think the argument to say that people don't, the argument that atheists tend to bring against belief in a creator tend to be, poor arguments in my view. Yeah, irrational arguments, problematic arguments.
Jazakallah Sharif. Just going over some of the answers you've given today, we find that atheism, or those that purport to the argument of atheism, like Dawkins, Sam Harris, de Gressy in America, whenever they have this discussion, and they seem to put Islam in one pot with all other religions, favoring superstition or myths and pushing this idea that this is what the basis of religions is. But how do we actually protect the Islamic beliefs and values? Because as we've seen and as we've discussed, they've been attacked very rigorously over a number of decades now.
Yeah, so obviously it's a detailed point, isn't it, in terms of how to address some of these issues. But I think at the beginning of the presentation, what I tried to explain is that this idea of atheism in the last 15, 20 years has become more prominent in the media, on social media, on YouTube channels, all these type of things, not because there's an intellectual debate per se, but because it's sat within a political context. And that political context was a justification of war and violence in the Muslim world by the demonization of Islam in particular and religion in general. Yeah. And so popular atheists who, maybe not necessarily had, fundamental mainstream appeal, they were sort of seen on the fringes of the media, came to the forefront, like Richard Dawkins, and then later on Sam Harris and Neil Tyson deGrasse and others, and they started to become a lot more forthright within their views. And then what happened was that, I think a lot of people, they wanted to be seen as part of the cool club, the intellectual club. I want to be seen as an intellectual. I want to be seen as the intelligent person. And so they gravitated towards these guys because they thought if they call themselves atheists, and I know I'm being, again, a little bit flippant, a little bit generalizing, so, apologize, but it does, in my experience at least, a lot of atheists have never really thought about the argument. I'll give you an example of this. I remember one time I spoke to one atheist, and he said, I said to him, why are you an atheist? He goes, well, I've researched all the arguments. He goes, I researched all the arguments. None of them justify belief in a creator. They've all got problems within it. So I spoke to him, I said, well, have you heard this argument? So I went through an argument with him. It was a very basic argument. It wasn't even a very complicated argument. Yeah. And it regressed to a point where we said, well, you have to affirm a creator that has a will. Yeah. And he goes, well, I've never heard the argument. Literally 15, 20 minutes later, he goes, I've never heard the argument. I'm going to have to go away and think about it. Yeah. So here's a person who was quite bullish, saying, yeah, dismiss all these myths, dismiss all these ideas. You know, I've looked at it all. It's incorrect. Comes across an argument, and then 15, 20 minutes later says, I'm going to have to go away and think about this now. Yeah. And I think that's the problem. Problem is that the rise of atheism, it sort of is not necessarily because people are really researching the evidences and just not feeling convinced. I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that it's because it's become the popular meme. Yeah. And that's why people adopt it. It's seen as, I'm the intelligent person, I'm a free thinker, I can be moral without God, all of these things. Yeah. These buzzwords that are used. But if a person thinks about it on a rational intellectual foundation, then you find actually it's the opposite. You lose the ability to have free choice. You lose the ability to explain conscious human beings. You lose the ability to ground morality. You lose the ability to ground rationality. Yeah. None of these things can now be grounded. And if you really want to bite the bullet as a materialist atheist, you have to now deny these things as well. So I think it's more fundamentally more problematic when people really study this and understand this and realize the implication. So I don't mean to go on, slightly went off track, but the point is that within the political context, the demonization of Islam and religion, promotion of atheism became more, it became more mainstreamed within the media, but it was mainstreamed as a way to justify the political context of the war on terror. These evil people with a religion that causes violence, they're the problem. And then you mainstream, popular voices against religion generally, against Islam in particular, against belief in a creator in particular. And so as a result, it justifies the demonization of these people, and you see the rise of atheism. And so this also points to the other fact, which is that communist Russia and communist China, this is where we see the greatest rate of atheism, and within secular Western societies as well, where they've divorced in their state and politics, divorced belief in God and religion within society, that you see this rise. Well, then obviously, if you want to protect these ideas, particularly within the Muslim world, then what you need a system of governance in order to protect that meets the values and the beliefs of the people, and ultimately is built upon a rational foundation. Building a system that's built upon the belief that a creator exists establishes rationality, consciousness, free will, and establishes the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave guidance, which is the Quran, and then you build your societies upon that. That's the best way to protect the believers and to promote the idea as well, the correct idea. In the meantime, we try to engage our communities, talk to them, talk to non-Muslims as well, and explain to them the rational coherency of our argument.
A question from Brother Frederick Jonathan. He says about morals, someone can argue that we can have other objective moral frameworks such as utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, and Humean morals. How would we argue that these are also false?
Yeah, but this is my point. My point, under an atheistic, materialistic paradigm, whether you say consequentialism, or you say utilitarianism, or any of these types of moral criteria or moral philosophies, all of it presupposes free will. But if you deny free will, there's no point. You're not even talking about moral philosophy. You're not even talking about which criteria is correct, because you need to go back to the basics and say, do you have free will or not? Can you ground free will? Can you explain free will within a purely materialistic paradigm? If you can't do that, then you can't even talk about free will. And that's the problem. So yeah, you can get into a debate and discussion about whether utilitarianism is correct or right or wrong, or the different types of theories about morality. But if you can't talk about if you can't justify free will within that paradigm, then forget about even talking about that. You're putting the cart before the horse there. You're talking about something secondary. Yeah.
Tariq Khan says, can science be used to prove or disprove the existence of God?
No. So science cannot be used to, when we say science cannot be used to prove the existence of God, it's because science is used to prove or to explain how limited finite things behave. Yeah, that's ultimately what science does. How does limited finite things behave? Now, as I mentioned earlier, science presupposes or is built upon certain axioms, certain assumptions. One of those assumptions is that the universe and things that happen within the universe are explainable, that ultimately the universe is comprehensible to the mind of a human being, which also means that the universe operates according to laws. Yeah, this is something that you have to assume within the way science works. For example, if I drop an apple here, yeah, and it falls to the ground, my assumption is that it will happen all the time because the laws of the universe and the patterns of observations remain fixed. Yeah, so I have to assume that. Now, what gives the ability to fix these laws? Is it just the observation? No, because there's nothing within the observation of an apple falling that tells me this will happen every single time. And in fact, certain philosophers like David Hume, who was an atheist, and he explained the problem of causality under an empirical basis. And he was also an empiricist, so he believed, you only come to knowledge through experience. And he says, from experience, you can never establish causal patterns between one effect, from the cause and the effect. You can't, from one thing to another, you can't establish there's a causal pattern. And he gives various examples, yeah, but in essence, he's trying to say this, is that if I drop an apple and the apple falls to the ground, I can't say it's because of the force of gravity that caused the apple to fall to the ground, because I don't sense that. All I sense is the event. And then he goes on even further. He goes, when I do it the second time around, I cannot say that the future event of dropping the apple will follow my past experience. Yeah, it's an assumption. It's correlation. Yeah, it's not necessarily causation. When you see two events take place, a cause and an effect, is that you're not actually sensing the cause causing the effect. You're seeing correlation, not causation. And you can't say that this pattern is fixed. Yeah. So, again, for science to be grounded in terms of the axioms of science or the assumptions that science operates under, it really needs to say that there needs to be comprehensibility within the universe. And comprehensibility of the universe, either as consistent patterns, requires a grounding. And the grounding has to be in what we call a necessary being, an unlimited independent creator that chose that creation operates according to this system. So science itself, yes, in origin, investigates how things operate, but the philosophy behind science requires us to believe, to make sense of science, actually requires us to believe in a creator that fixed the laws of the universe in a particular way, or activated, yeah, or actualized the patterns within the universe in the way that we sense them. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair, Sharif. Interesting question. Another one here from Tariq, Brother Tariq Khan. Do you think some people consciously avoid believing in God because once they do, they will have to live and abide by the system revealed by God in both their personal and collective lives?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I know it's different people have different experiences, isn't it? Some people, come across problems within, let's say a person adopts a particular religious belief like Christianity or Hinduism. Let's say Christianity is an example, and they have problems with the concept of the Trinity. It doesn't make sense. There's claims about salvation which are not fundamentally grounded upon rational arguments. Trying to justify why the Bible is true becomes difficult, and so they reject, Christianity, and out of thinking that Christianity, rejecting that means rejection of belief in God, they might reject belief in God. So they may have good reasons why they're rejecting Christianity, and then they sort of extend it slightly too, they make too much of an extension to then include all God claims or all claims of revelation. Yeah, but they had a reason to do that. So I'm not trying to say that there are people out there who just want to live a haram, forbidden lifestyle and therefore say, right, I just don't want to believe in God so that I'm not under any restrictions and control. There are some people who had reasons of rejecting a particular religious claim, but then overextended that to claim all religions are therefore incorrect. But there are also other people who sense that the way of life to live, what will give them happiness, is a hedonistic lifestyle. Yeah. So, we see, whether we're living in the Muslim world and we see this like bright, flashy pictures of what happens with people partying and having a good time and, the type of hedonistic lifestyle that sometimes we perceive that happens in the West, then people think, oh, that's what we want. That's what's going to make me happy. Why am I adhering to this religion? Why am I adhering to Islam with all these restrictions and difficulties? I want to be partying, taking drugs, doing all sorts. Yeah. So there are people like that who get sold this type of and I'm going to call it an illusion, yeah, and this assumption this is what's going to make the person happy. It might give them temporary pleasure, but it's not actually going to give them tranquility. So I think this is what some people get sold upon, and so as a result think, you know what, Islam is making me miserable because I want that, and so therefore they follow that lifestyle thinking it's going to make them happy. And as we know, the rise of mental health problems within the West is actually very high. 1 in 5 people will suffer from depression. A number of people will also suffer from anxiety and other types of problems. And not all of them are biological based. Some of them are reactive. They're environmentally influenced as well. So we see these problems of well-being and happiness within the West. Similarly, some people, they look at the West and they think, oh, look, they progressed. They have the science, they have this technology, they have people who queue up in queues outside post offices. Look at our land. We're meant to be Muslims. They claim that Islam is true. And look at our lands, full of corruption, problems, etc. So therefore, they make a shallow judgment that the reason why the West is progressing is because they left belief in a God. And the reason why the Muslim world is regressed is because we've adopted belief in Islam. And so if we leave Islam, we'll become like, quote unquote, the Westerners. Yeah. But in reality, the Muslim lands is not a product of belief in Islam. It's not built upon the values of Islam. The Muslim world primarily is built upon a post-colonial structure that tries to imitate and mimic what occurs within the West. Yeah. So you create this schizophrenic society, this split personality of the society, where you get Islamic values on the one hand, but the fundamental structures of society are secular, following capitalistic rules and philosophy. And so you don't see any progress within that society. And then you have these rulers who are dictators that are supported by the West, who are, don't have any concerns for development and progress for the society, and are siphoning off the West through trade deals, siphoning off the resources to the West through trade deals, etc. So this is why you have these problems. It's not a product of Islam and the Muslims. It's a product of external factors and the fact that we actually left Islam, yeah, and left Islam in a comprehensive sense.
So he's saying there, Sharif, that a lot of the mental health problems and a lot of the issues that we see are as a product of the political systems in these countries.
I think obviously it's a very touchy subject when you talk about mental health because, on the one hand, you get some people that sort of say, "Oh, there is no mental health. It's all conceptual. Yeah, it's all problems of the concepts. Yeah, that's the reason why." And he just has to fix his concepts up and fix his personality, and he'll get rid of mental health problems like that. So you have one extreme like that. Another extreme is basically say that you have no agency to affect your mental health. You are simply a product of your biology. If you're unhappy, it's your biology that's problem. Here, let me give you a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, Prozac or fluoxetine tablet to solve that situation. Yeah. What we actually generally see within mental health is a culmination of different factors. There may be certain biological factors, but there are also societal factors. And some of those societal factors are outside of our control. And some of those societal factors also affect how we view things like problems within society. And so, if you're in an environment which says that this is your only life, yeah, that you need to maximize it to the best of your possibility, that if you lose out on anything in this life, you'll never get anything ever again, because once you lose this life, that's it. Khalas, you've got nothing else to look forward to. And so when you create these types of, paradigms in the mind of a person, this framework of thought, and then they face difficulties, they don't achieve maximum benefit, they don't achieve everything that they wanted, then they don't have the emotional and psychological concepts, yeah, or stability in order to overcome the difficulties that we can face from time to time. And this is why, in the famous narration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, strange or amazing are the affairs of the believer. Yeah, so amazing are the affairs of the believer. Whenever something bad happens, he remains patient, yeah, and he gets reward for it. And if something good happens, then he's thankful to Allah. Basically saying that every opportunity, whether it's something that quote unquote benefits me or something that doesn't benefit me, harms me, is a way of growing as a human being. Spiritual growth is a way of getting reward. Either I'm happy with the good that I get, or if it's difficult and I remain patient, I'll get something even better, in the next life. So it's like amazing are the affairs of the believers. Yeah, everything is good, potentially good for us, even the difficulties. Yeah, so people who suffer from loss of children, loss of parents, loss of livelihood, they see this as a test. Yeah, they see that there is a creator that exists, that Islam is the revelation from this creator, that it gives us certain fundamental ideas about things like wealth, like life, like health, that these things, they may come, they may go, yeah, but they're tests for us. And it's how we respond to those tests, because the ultimate reality, the ultimate life is not this life, it's the next life. This is temporary, it's the eternal life to come. And that's how we start to frame things. How does this life correspond to the eternal life? How does this life correspond to what our creator wants from us? Yeah.
Brother Masoom Khan asks, in the proof of God debate, is the burden of proof on one side or both sides?
No, I think it's on both sides, isn't it? It's on a number of it's on a number of issues as well. The first burden of proof is that people have to prove why their epistemic, the epistemology, how they justify their ideas, how the methodology of knowing things, how that methodology is correct in the first place. Yeah, and is the methodology that should be used. So many times you'll find a lot of atheists turning around saying there is no evidence for God. You've not presented me any evidence. What they mean is I only accept observation as evidence, and you've not presented me an observation of God. Therefore, I reject, your belief or your arguments for God. That's what they're saying. So really, they have to justify why the only methodology we can use to ascertain truths or make knowledge claims is empiricism. If they can't establish that, yeah, and they can't justify that, then they can't basically make any claims against or for. They can't evaluate the argument, because if they can't justify that only science is the only basis of determining truth, then they have no basis to criticize your methodology if you come from a logical or rational methodology. So that's the first thing. First thing is to justify. I mean, obviously, as Muslims, all we have to justify our methodology of how we arrive at truth. Similarly, if an atheist turns around and claims that all arguments are not sufficient, yeah, or that the evidences that he's been presented are not sufficient, he has to demonstrate why they're not sufficient. He can't just simply say, well, it's just not convincing in my mind. Why is it not convincing to you? Yeah, what's the evidence that you have for this? Yeah, again, similarly for the Muslim, if he's going to prove the existence of a creator, he has to demonstrate arguments and evidence and the implication of the observation of how it leads to a creator also. So I think there are both sides have to justify their position.
Brother Jason Smith asks, can you explain empirical and testimonial evidence and explain logical / rational deduction? to what measure or level do these evidences need to reach for truth to be established?
Yeah, so this is like a really deep question to ask. So let me give an example. Yes, so Imam Ghazali, he gives an example because he's addressing the empiricists of his day, what we call the scientism. This idea that only experience establishes truth. And he wrote in his book on Usul al-Fiqh called Al-Mustasfa. He actually gives various arguments and evidences. So he says, look, and he gives this as an argument. He goes, if I was to say that Baghdad exists and you've never been to Baghdad, yeah, would it be rational to deny it? Yeah. And he said it's not rational because the testimonial evidence is sufficient such that it becomes impossible that the number of people who have no connection to each other, who have witnessed Baghdad and communicate to you that Baghdad exists, that their testimonial evidence is impossible for them have come together to conspire upon a lie. Yeah, it's like, for example, saying that World War One didn't exist because I never saw it. Yeah, this hyper empirical approach is just simply something which is nonsensical. And in fact, this is one of the fundamental reasons why we have a lot of people out there who believe that the Earth is flat, because they have a hyper empirical approach, which is that, well, I'm not going to believe it until I see it. Yeah, and they're saying, well, all the pictures that I've seen, the Earth looks flat to me, from our eye sea level observations. Yeah, or even when we're on a plane, it looks flat. But the point being is this: is that, look, if you adhere to that hyper empirical position, then you have to you have to claim that all this testimonial evidence of all these observations that have been claimed by different groups and different people that might have reached into the tens of thousands are all false. Yeah, not only all false, but there's a massive conspiracy out there. So then it becomes more incredulous to believe that there's this conspiracy of silence to talk about the Earth being flat, than to accept. It's more incredulous to think that this conspiracy than it is to say that actually the testimonial evidence is true, the Earth is round. Yeah. So this is, and the same thing, whether it's World War One, 1066, Hastings, testimonial evidence, and in fact, many of this in science, you're not proving every single scientific theory. You'll take certain scientific theories as accepted because previous scientists have done the experiment and justified it, and there's some sort of collective agreement. Either there's testimonial evidence, and you're just building upon that. Yeah. So testimonial evidence is actually critical within modern scientific research anyway, generally, because you're building upon past scientific experiments and observations, and that's been communicated to you through testimonial evidence. So that's testimonial evidence. And the final one is obviously irrational or deductive arguments. So, for example, it's a very, very basic example of this. If I say all men are mortal, if I say John is a man, and I then conclude John is mortal, yeah, because John is a subset of all men, and all men are mortal, then I don't need to see that John is mortal, that he actually has died, in order to conclude that he is mortal. Yeah, it's just a logical entailment of the argument. Same thing if I was to turn around and I say all bachelors are unmarried. Yeah, so yeah, by the very definition of the word bachelor, they must be unmarried. Yeah, they would say the predicate is contained within the subject. Yeah, so you'd come to that conclusion. Similarly, if I turn around and I say the internal angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees on a flat surface, then that's another, and that becomes now an essential definition of a triangle. Then that's just a logical position to hold on these types of things. So so we can talk about more details with regards to this, but what we find when we look at the belief in a creator and the observations, there are certain rational and axiomatic or logically axiomatic principles that we hold on to, which are necessary. These are like the fundamental basic beliefs that you need in order to make sense. If you reject them, it becomes absurd. And based upon that, utilizing our observations, utilizing our understanding of what a contingent being is, we can come to a conclusion of a necessary, unlimited, independent creator, whom we as Muslims call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So there's a lot more to be said, about this particular topic area.
Jazakallah khair. Question here from brother Hilal Daifi. Is the problem of causality the same as the problem of induction?
No, it's not. It's different. Yeah. So the reason why it's different is because causality, if I understand from what you're asking, is causality as a general principle. Yeah. If you're saying causality as a general principle, is it the same as the problem of induction? No. Because the reason why we conclude causality, why things have cause and effects, is not because of experience. It's not empiricism. It's not like, and this is it's a really hard concept for an empiricist. Some people had to understand. I'm talking about some atheists that I've discussed with, is that when you turn around and you say you don't observe causation and then conclude causation, you assume causation first, and then using that framework, you then interpret observation. That's how you actually operate. That's how science actually operates. Yeah, it's very difficult for them to understand that because they think causality is something that we just experience, and then we come to the conclusion that therefore causality must exist. So no, it's actually a fundamental principle of rational thinking that causality is known to be true. Yes, and it has to be an objective fact in order for us to make rational concepts, in order for science to operate, for it to be true. So therefore, it's actually a principle, a metaphysical principle that's independent of space and time. It's not contingent upon what universe you're in. It's something that you use as a principle to understand and interpret observation. If that's the case, meaning we have to have this first principle of causality, yeah, in order to understand and explain observation, then it's not the case that we observe causality that confirms causality, we observe causality and that's how we come to the conclusion, but rather we assume it and then we interpret the universe according to it. So it's not induction. It's not saying, well, I've observed 10 things that have had causal relationships, but maybe the 11th might not. Rather, we assume causality, not even assume, it's a rational axiom that's necessary for rational thinking. We have to have that in order to make those 10 observations make sense that they are causal, yeah, or that they can be comprehended. Yeah, so therefore, any 11th observation, if it's limited finite, meaning it's a contingent being, it must be caused by something external to itself. I can make that conclusion without knowing what that cause is, meaning I can conclude it must have an explanation outside of itself, a cause for its existence outside of itself, without seeing what that cause is, because I hold this principle that causality is a necessary component of rational thinking. It's how I comprehend the universe and comprehend fundamentally contingent beings. Therefore, if it's a contingent being, it must be caused. Yeah. Again, it's a really deep, can become a little bit complicated subject, but hopefully that's clear in terms of the answer, inshallah. Unless the brother's got a follow-up question on that or follow-up point that he wants to raise.
Yeah, inshallah, we'll see if he asks further. We've been talking about solutions to man problems, Brother Sharif, and when I look at Islam and the description in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, we find that Islam is very comprehensive. It has detailed rules about governance, political matters, geography. We're in a pandemic at the moment. Islam has very detailed rules on how to behave in a pandemic, how to deal with pandemics, the judiciary in terms of how to judge and how to organize society in terms of crime and punishment, societal affairs, relationships between men and women, relationships between different groups of people. And in all of these areas, there's very detailed solutions to how human beings operate between each other, and very detailed legalistic rules, and these have been implemented practically over the last 1400 years. So this is not just something that's theory in the books. This is something that's practically implemented, solved people's problems, and continue to solve people's problems from the 7th century onwards. But when I look at atheism, I'm just wondering, where are the solutions to man's problems there?
Well, obviously, one, there isn't one, but secondly, they probably would argue that, well, atheism is not an ideology, it's not a worldview, it's just simply a particular claim that, or an idea that there are no God or gods, yeah. So they'll say, well, it doesn't tell us anything about morality, which they would admit to. It doesn't tell anything about, judiciary, economics, politics, or anything like this. So I think atheists themselves would simply accept that, and that's why you have different types of atheists. You have communist atheists, you have humanist atheists, you have different theories of moral values, things like that. So I think this is what they will acknowledge, that it doesn't doesn't answer any of these questions. But what I've tried to show in this presentation is, let's push it even further and actually really question: can you even get off the ground to talk about any of these matters, like judiciary, like governance, like politics, like how human beings should behave? Can you even get off the ground once you've adopted this materialistic atheistic paradigm? If you start off that, I don't believe you can even get off the ground and talk about anything else. Yeah, that's why it goes back to that fundamental question: does a creator exist or not? If you say no, you're in this position of, I think, basically nihilism. Denying meaning, purpose, even ability to choose. Yeah, and I think that's, for me, that would be incredibly scary to be in that position, to be a person who thinks I have value and other people have value, my parents have value, yeah, my family has value, but then having no way to justify why that value exists. That would be, that would be very worrying for me.
We have a question from Brother Muhammad Shias Mustafa. Uh, we asked two questions. What's your opinion on Kalam cosmological argument? And what's your opinion on the contingency argument of Ibn Sina?
Yeah, so look, for me, look, sometimes people they like to debate the finer details about this particular argument and that particular argument, and some of the arguments are good, but they're incomplete, and some of the arguments might be good for certain people because it convinces them, and there's a level of rationality for it. Yeah, so I think it really depends upon how you approach the discussion, how you approach these questions. So obviously, when you look at the Kalam cosmological argument, like the famous formulation of it, whatever begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. The cause cannot be an infinite regress, therefore there must be a first cause, and the first cause must be independent, unlimited. Yeah, so that's sort of the normal presentation of the argument. Yeah, certainly the first three premises, where we conclude that the universe has a cause. I think generally it's a good argument, but obviously you still have to do a bit of work. You have to sort of understand, what do we mean by cause? Why should something that has a beginning have a cause? Why do we come to the conclusion? So what I tend to do, with my personal experience, is I tend to use maybe talking about the universe beginning to exist. I'll talk about an infinite sum of finite things being an illogical or a logically absurd or problematic idea. I will talk about an infinite regress being, resulting in logical absurdities. I will introduce ideas of contingency and limited things are dependent, to give a broad picture in the mind of a person. Yeah, and so sometimes when we try to formulate arguments within a very syllogistic, logical style, we limit the semantic range of being able to explain and communicate ideas. What do I mean by that? I mean, that's the ability to explain things, to talk to people, to explain different angles to the same issue sometimes is broader than just simply having syllogistic styles of logical argumentation. Yeah. So, and really, logic is only syllogisms. Premises. They're only there to just meant to be as an aid. They're not there to be like the default be all and end all of determining whether an argument is true or false. It's just an aid to order a particular set of ideas. And sometimes when you're trying to explain something, you have to explain the full gravity of what you're trying to explain and not necessarily just present it within a short logical format or a series of logical propositions. I probably haven't really answered this question fully, but I'm just saying that various arguments work so long as you give it its full weight. Yeah.
Jazakallah. Inshallah, we're coming near to the end of today's session. Did you want to summarize or make any particular points before we end?
Yeah, so all my presentation was a very brief presentation. Yeah, I know it's 40 minutes in length, and I didn't even cover all of the points. Yeah, but it's brief. But there's so much more detail to be explained. And really, the basic point is that atheism under a materialistic paradigm is highly problematic in order to ground what it means to be a human being, what it means to give unique value to a human being above and beyond a rock or an atom. Yeah, talking about human beings here. Yeah, and there's a fundamental problem that is so fundamental that you can't even get off the ground to talk about how human beings should behave because you're stuck here. Yeah, whereas Islam not only sort of accords to the rational mind, but allows us to give us a broader picture of how the human condition, how it should be satisfied in terms of the human nature and the human condition, and that this ability to act and behave in a proper way, is something that's defined by our Creator, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this all-knowing, all-powerful, all-wise being who created us for a purpose and created the universe for a purpose. And part of that purpose is to worship our Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and it then tells us how to live our life, both on an individual level as well as a wider societal level. So, we as Muslims, maybe we need to reconnect to some of our intellectual heritage and intellectual history, not just on the proof of God arguments, but also on the wider arguments about Islam and how it solves problems on the macro level as well as the micro level. And really appreciate that we've been given this great gift of the guidance of Islam, and that we need to work for it in terms of improving our understanding and try to manifest it around us as well. So just some points, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Sharif. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of today's session, but Jazakallah khair to the brothers and sisters who attended, and those that were able to ask questions and comments. Jazakallah khair, appreciated. And Jazakallah khair to Brother Sharif for giving us such a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter and going through some of these very complicated, or what seemed to be complicated at the beginning, but issues that we as Muslims have been dealing with, as you mentioned, for over 1,000 years. Inshallah, hopefully we can carry this discussion further, not just here online, but further in terms of discussion with our families and our colleagues and our friends, and actually produce thinking and debate and real discussion, as opposed to the false discussions that we find that are being propagated throughout the internet and on the media without any real challenge. So hopefully, inshallah, brothers and sisters can actually enter this discussion with a view of bringing people closer to Islam, and also showing people that Islam is a practical solution to life's problems. Inshallah, we'll reconvene next Friday. Alhamdulillah, the blessed month of Ramadan is fast approaching, and next week's discussion will be on entering Ramadan comprehensively. So inshallah, Jazakallah khair to the audience, and Jazakallah khair to Brother Sharif. We'll finish off with Surah As, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal As, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.